Elias Calder had learned the Rio Grande the way a man learned a wound, by touch, by pain, and by the days he swore he would stop pressing his fingers into it. The river moved with a lazy stubbornness, brown-green in the late sun, carrying reeds and thin scraps of sky. Beyond it, the brush thickened into a wall of thorns and mesquite knots where you could disappear without meaning to. He rode into his outpost every afternoon with the same posture and the same silence, as if his horse and his badge could keep the peace by staying still. The badge sat heavy at his saddlebag strap, not on his chest where men liked to see it, but where he could feel it when his hand drifted with habit. It had been the only thing that mattered to the men under his command, law in a place that had forgotten how to be gentle. On the day the trouble began, the wind carried a different smell than the usual. Wet earth, iron from the river stones, smoke from someone's cook fire. There was also the sharp bite of panic, something Elias could tell by the way his own stomach tightened before anyone spoke. Delphine Rusk met him at the stock pen, where she kept her ledger on a nail and her temper on a nail beside it. Elias had seen her anger once and learned it could be quieter than most men's politeness. "Ranger," she said, and in the word was both permission and warning. "You're late." He swung down from the saddle, boots thudding on packed dirt. "The trail don't stretch itself for my convenience." Delphine's gaze flicked to his saddlebag. "It ain't your courtesy they're asking for. It's the woman." Elias felt the word land like a coin in a cup. The woman, not a name. Never a name from the mouths of men who wanted something without paying for it. "There's a woman in your ledger?" he asked. Delphine tapped her nails against the ledger's cover. "She ain't wrote down gentle, but she's been here since last moon." Maira Choctaw. Elias didn't ask how Delphine knew her full name. He already suspected. Delphine had ears like traps and a memory that kept what it wanted. "She brought bundles," Delphine went on. "Clay, beads, rope, food in jars like she's living off it. Men been watching her too hard." Elias looked out toward the outpost yard. Smoke rose from the cooking shed. The men were at work, but their eyes kept coming back like flies to honey. In the heat, suspicion grew quicker than crops. "Why now?" Elias asked. Delphine's smile had no warmth. "Because the deed's in her bundle." That made the air shift. Elias kept his face steady, but his thoughts tightened. There was an old agreement, written years before by a man who'd since died with his boots still on. The outpost farm, thin as it was, stubborn as a mule, was claimed in part by settlers who'd lost it once to floods and debt. Delphine had spoken to Elias about it with tidy words and careful anger. She'd said men would fight for it. "Whose deed?" he asked. Delphine's eyes narrowed. "The outpost farms. The one your superiors promised the company men. The one that's supposed to keep the rifles fed. The one I've been guarding from squatters." Elias heard the clink of his own teeth as he swallowed. "A native woman ain't supposed to own land in this border," Delphine added, her tone turning righteous as a preacher's. "But she's got paper. And paper makes liars into saints, and saints into thieves." Elias let the silence hang. He had seen men with the law in their mouths use it like a cudgel. He had also seen men without it turned into ghosts. "If she's got the deed," he said slowly, "then she's also got the proof. And if she's got proof, you call it theft only when you mean to steal it yourself." Delphine's lips tightened. "Don't pretend, Ranger. I ain't protecting her. I'm protecting the outpost. The only thing holding this line together is that the farm don't fall to the first hungry crowd with guns." Elias swung toward the main house, where the boards creaked under heat and the walls held the day's dust like a skin. He found Maira Choctaw seated on a crate near the doorway, as if she'd been allowed to rest there by someone who didn't understand how rest could become leverage. Her shawl was pulled around her shoulders. A bundle lay across her knees, leather wrapped in cloth, tied with a cord. Her eyes went to him without surprise. She didn't look like a woman waiting to be rescued. She looked like a woman deciding which lies she could afford. Ranger Calder, she said. She spoke his name like she'd heard it through other men's mouths and chosen her own truth. He approached carefully, boots stopping where he could see her hands. Maira Choctaw. Delphine says you got property paper in your bundle. She shifted her weight and the bundle moved with her. Delphine says many things. Then you heard her claim, Elias said. I heard men talk in the cantina, Maira answered, and her voice stayed level. They said the land was cursed because it fed too many mouths. They said you were the sword that would cut the curse out. Elias didn't flinch. I'm the law, yes. And law, Maira replied, is only a story told by whoever holds the pencil. For a moment, Elias forgot the dust and the stairs and the sun on his back. He remembered long rides where men talked big until the bullets arrived. He remembered the way the frontier ate good intentions. He reached into his saddlebag and removed a folded warrant, his fingers deliberate. The paper looked official. His badge looked convincing. But he couldn't put the badge into the argument where it mattered. It could only decide who got to walk away. I've got orders, Elias said. You're to turn over the deed and come with me for questioning. Maira's eyes narrowed slightly. For questioning by who? Delphine? Your captain who don't come down here but once in a season? Or the men who've been circling my fire like vultures? Elias watched her breathing. She wasn't afraid of him the way frightened women were supposed to be. She was afraid of the men behind him, of what they might do to test their own power. I'm not asking, Elias said. I'm telling. Maira's hands tightened on the bundle. Then you're not hearing me. I brought this paper because I had to. It ain't stolen. It ain't bought with blood. It's mine by the signatures of men who never met me but still put their marks down. Elias stared at the bundle, at the way it sat between her and the world like a shield. Why you have it? He asked. Maira tilted her chin. Because when my people were driven off the bottoms, settlers promised land. They promised protection. They promised papers to keep those promises. Later, they changed their minds. And when they changed their minds, they changed their stories too. Elias didn't want to believe stories told by the powerful, but he also didn't want to ignore a paper with legal weight. That was how men became corrupt, by needing simple answers where the truth refused to be simple. You got proof? He asked. I got the paper, Maira said. I got the names. I got the date. I got the seal. But proof don't stop a bullet, Ranger. It just makes the bullet more honest. Delphine stepped closer, her boots quiet on the boards. Bring her in, she commanded, before she convinces another one of your men to look the other way. Elias turned his head toward her, just enough to let her see he noticed the power she tried to borrow. I'll handle it, he said. Delphine's stare held his for a second longer than it should. You always say that. Elias faced Maira again. Open the bundle. Give me what you're carrying. Maira's gaze flicked to the yard, to where two men leaned near the fence with rifles resting casually, as if casualness made them harmless. Their hands kept close, not to be helpful, but to be ready. I'll show you what's there, she said at last, but you're not taking it until you hear what it binds. Elias's jaw tightened. Bindings don't stop arrest. Maira leaned forward and unwrapped the cloth carefully like prayer. Between the layers was a leather folder, thick with papers tied with twine. She slid it toward him without touching his hands. Her fingers moved with a steady care, not fear, not hesitation. If she meant to fight, she didn't show it in her movement. Elias broke the twine and scanned the documents. Names, dates, a seal pressed into wax long since hardened. The language of contracts had always been cold, but the cold had weight. He found the deed description for the outpost farm, acreage measured in lines, boundary markers, a clause for transfer upon disputes. There was a signature Elias recognized, not Delphine's, not his. A man who'd once advised the governor about treaties. Elias could feel his own authority wobble. This wasn't a fraud, at least not a crude one. Delphine's voice sharpened. See? It's real, and it shouldn't be hers. Elias looked up. You wanted the proof. Now you got it. Delphine's nostrils flared. Real paper don't make her rightful. It makes it rightful in the eyes of the ink, Elias said. Maira watched him with quiet attention, like she was waiting to see if he'd choose the only honest path available. Ranger, she said softly, ink don't care who's staring, but people do. He stood. The standoff felt like a stretched wire. It could snap any moment. Put the papers away, Elias said to Maira, voice turning firmer. You're coming with me. We settle this with the proper channels. Delphine's mouth curved. Channels. That's how you slow walk a problem until it breaks itself. Elias didn't respond. He couldn't afford a debate with Delphine while armed men hovered like crows. Maira folded the deed back into its leather cover, tied it once, and slid the bundle toward her. Then she stood, unhurried. The gesture shouldn't have mattered, but Elias noticed how she placed herself. Shoulders angled not toward him, but toward the nearest rifleman, ready to move if the yard became a battlefield. They walked inside together under the gaze of men who wanted either surrender or blood. Elias led her to a back room where maps were pinned and cups were scratched by elbows. He told the guard to wait outside. He didn't believe in placing a woman in chains like a symbol. When the door shut, Elias finally spoke with no witnesses. Tell me the truth, he said. How did you come to have this deed? Maira's eyes didn't drop. I was handed it by a man who thought he was bargaining for peace. He believed signing could keep men from breaking promises. Elias's throat tightened. And you believed him? I believed my elders, Maira said, and I believed that the frontier was a place where a promise could live if you fed it. He wanted to argue, but he had never seen a promise fed. He'd seen promises traded for land and then buried with the dead. Why come here? Elias asked. Because my family needed a place to plant, she said. Because the river bottoms were ours before your men turned them into a fence line. Because I heard Delphine was keeping peace by balancing debts. Elias frowned. You heard wrong. Maira's mouth tightened as if she held grief in a place that didn't show easily. I heard what I needed. I came with papers and food. I didn't come with a gun. He stared at her hands, hands that could have been weapons if she'd learned to use them that way. Instead, she held herself like a woman who believed words still mattered. Outside, footsteps shifted in the corridor. Then came a sharp knock, too quick, too eager. Elias opened the door before the guard could answer. Delphine stood there, her face white at the edges. Ranger, she said, and her voice had a tremor in it she tried to hide. It's happening. What's happening? Elias demanded. Delphine swallowed. The men by the corral. They've brought someone with them. A messenger from the other side. He says the outpost farm belongs to a different claim now. Elias's stomach dropped. Who's the messenger? Delphine hesitated. He won't give his name. Says you don't need it. Maira stepped forward, her eyes sharpening. That's a lie with a throat. Elias felt his body go cold. Men who refused names were either cowards or killers. He motioned toward the room's window. Show me. Delphine opened the door wider and pointed. Elias and Maira looked out through the slats. A horse stood in the yard, sweat shining on its flanks. Beside it, a figure in a dark coat argued with Elias's guard. The figure's hands kept moving, palming something small, gesturing like a salesman, like a gambler throwing dice with his fingers. Then the figure looked up and met Elias's stare. It wasn't a stranger Elias couldn't place. It was a man he'd ridden with once, Carter Pruitt, a former ranger from Elias's early service, now working for men who paid without asking questions. Elias hadn't expected to see Carter here. He also hadn't expected the outpost to become a place where Carter could bring trouble. Carter called out, Ranger Calder, I heard you caught a trespasser with company papers. Elias stepped out into the yard, Maira close behind. The men fell into half circles of attention. Spears of sunlight cut the dust. "You're not supposed to be here," Elias said. Carter Pruitt smiled like a man baring teeth but calling it charm. "I'm supposed to make things right. Your captain sent me to collect what don't belong to her." Elias stared at him. "You got an order?" Carter's grin widened. "Sure do. Right here." He reached into his coat and produced a paper, fresh, unwrinkled, stamped. It looked official enough to make fools relax. Delphine sucked in a breath. Elias held the urge to snatch the paper away and examine it. He didn't. Not yet. "You got papers," Maira said calmly, stepping forward. "So show them to the one who knows ink the way a mother knows her child." Carter glanced at Maira with a flicker of irritation. "She ain't your judge." Maira's eyes didn't blink. "No, but I can read a seal, and I can tell when a stamp is new enough to still smell the forge." A hush moved through the yard like a held breath. Carter's smile thinned. "Watch your mouth, woman." Elias's hand drifted toward his holster. His other hand hovered near his belt where his badge lived, not pinned but present like a promise. "Carter," Elias said, voice low, "that paper's false." Carter laughed. "You don't know that." Elias stepped closer, enough that Carter could see the scar on his eyebrow, enough that he could feel how Elias's authority had shifted into something personal. "I know because I've seen that seal before," Elias said. "Not on a governor's desk, on a man's ledger when he sells the same land twice." Carter's eyes narrowed. "Then arrest me, Ranger." Delphine made a sound, half gasp, half protest, and Elias turned to her, noticing how her gaze jumped, how her lips pressed tight. She was scared, yes, but she was also calculating. Fear and planning always walk together on the frontier. Elias realized then that Delphine wasn't entirely against Maira owning land. She was against losing control over who could claim it. Carter's new paper threatened Delphine's leverage. He could feel the yard changing. The men's hands shifted on rifles. A standoff inside the standoff. Elias looked at Maira and saw that she'd reached for something at her shawl, only a small pouch. But it wasn't for a weapon. It was for a switch of cards only a few could read. "Ranger," Maira said quietly, "you've got one law in your chest and another in your head. Which one's stronger?" Elias didn't answer. He took one step back toward the back room and drew Carter's attention with it. "If that paper's false," Elias said loudly, "then you're trespassing under my command. And if you're working for men who want to steal land with a stamp, you're part of the theft." Carter's laugh turned sharp. "You can't prove it." Elias nodded toward the guard who held the musket. "Bring the lamp oil." The guard looked confused, as if lamps were irrelevant to gunfights. But Elias's voice carried an order that made men obey. Maira watched the guard move. She didn't look relieved. She looked like she expected what would happen next. Carter shifted his stance and his hand moved toward his coat's inner pocket. Elias saw it. It was a small shift, but Elias had spent years reading horses, weather, and men's hands. "Don't," Elias warned. Carter drew out not a pistol, but a little vial and a cloth. He moved fast, too fast for Elias to lunge cleanly. The vial tipped toward the deed paper in his hand. The cloth pressed over the seal. Carter wasn't destroying the evidence, he was altering it. Elias swore under his breath and stepped forward, slamming his palm against Carter's wrist. The vial shattered, and a sharp chemical smell filled the yard. "Stop!" Elias barked. But the damage had already happened. Men recoiled, coughing. Carter yanked free with a jerk that wasn't strength, just survival. He bolted toward the corral, and with him, two of Elias's men who had been watching Maira with hunger, not duty, followed, like the idea of blame was too sweet. The yard erupted into motion. "Shut the gates!" Delphine shouted, though Elias knew she didn't truly command. She only instructed chaos after it had already chosen sides. Maira moved like she had known the yard would turn into a trap. She grabbed Elias's wrist, not hard, not pleading, and yanked him toward the doorway. "You don't run after him alone," she said. "They'll use you as their excuse." Elias's eyes snapped to her. "I'm law." "And law," she replied, "is a man's story unless you make it a woman's safety." Outside, shouts rose. Someone fired a shot into the air, not to scare, but to mark a beginning. Elias heard the thud of another round hitting wood. He and Maira shoved into the back room and threw the door's latch into place. Their breath hitched in the tight space. "What do you know?" Elias demanded. Maira's gaze held his for a moment, then flicked to the corner where a lantern sat. Her eyes lingered there as if she were counting matches. "The deed," she said. "Your captain and Delphine's friends want it. Carter's paper don't matter. They can burn it, forge it, swear over it. But this outpost farm is the only proof of what the governor promised. And the only reason men keep you in this outpost is because you've been too stubborn to let them steal it." Elias's chest tightened. "So you're saying my stubbornness is the problem?" Maira let out a breath that sounded like anger turned into something else. "I'm saying it makes you dangerous. They don't want the deed to be in your hands. They want you quiet." A crash outside made the boards shudder. Footsteps pounded the corridor. Elias's hand went to his revolver. He didn't draw it at first. He listened. There were too many men out there now, and their pace lacked purpose. They were moving like gamblers looking for a table. "They want me dead," Elias said. Maira shook her head. "They want you blamed. They want your badge to be a funeral, not a shield." In that moment, Elias understood the true trap. If someone killed his authority under a false pretense, his superiors could choose whichever story benefited them. The law would be rewritten. The frontier would swallow the truth. Delphine banged on the back door from outside, her voice too frantic to be practiced. "Elias! Maira, open up!" Elias's eyes widened. "Delphine?" Maira leaned toward the keyhole and listened. "It's not her. Not her voice." Elias's blood went hotter. He had trusted Delphine's fear as genuine, but now it smelled like a trick. Outside, another voice cut through the pounding. It was Carter's, rough with satisfaction. "Ranger Calder, we got your woman cornered. You want her alive? Come out with that badge in your hands." Elias felt the badge's weight in his mind like a stone in a river. He had brought it like a tool. Now it was a leash. Maira stepped close to him, so close he could smell the soap she used on her clothes, woodsy, almost bitter. "They'll take your badge, Ranger. Then they'll use you to make their theft sound official." Elias stared at her. "Then what's the plan?" Maira didn't look away. "We make the plan become their punishment." She reached into her bundle and pulled out a folded paper she hadn't shown him yet. It was smaller, tucked behind the deed. Elias's eyes focused on a letter seal, older than Carter's. The wax had a cracked pattern like dried river mud. "My elders kept copies," Maira said. "Not for men like Carter, for men like you." Elias's throat tightened. "What is it?" "A letter from the treaty man," she replied. "It says the deed was transferred to me under protection clauses because settlers would resist the treaty. It names your outpost's farm. It names Delphine's husband, too." Elias blinked. "Delphine's husband?" Maira nodded. "He promised protection and then got scared. He signed for the paper, then later tried to buy it back with false claims. Delphine knew." The confession landed in Elias's chest like a fist. He didn't like Delphine, but he hadn't wanted to believe she'd built her leverage on betrayal. Still, the frontier didn't give you clean villains. It gave you people who survived by being half a liar. The pounding outside changed. A heavy weight scraped against the door, and Elias heard wood splintering. "Maira," Elias said, voice urgent. "We can't hold them long." "We won't," Maira replied. She crossed to a narrow window slit near the floor. She knelt and pulled aside a plank that Elias hadn't noticed before. Beneath it was a shallow crawl space that smelled of stored roots. Elias stared at her. "You knew this was here?" Maira's face didn't soften. "I watched Delphine. I watched what men avoided. And I watched what the outpost buried." Elias didn't have time to decide whether to admire or resent her knowledge. The door shuddered again. Carter's voice boomed, "Open that door! Ranger Calder, I'll give you one chance!" Elias drew his revolver, not because he wanted to shoot, because he wanted the option. Maira placed her hand on his wrist, steadying him like she could feel his pulse. "If you fire, they'll call you the aggressor. If you step out with your badge, they'll call you compliant. We do something neither story expects." Elias swallowed. "What?" Maira leaned closer, her eyes bright with a dangerous calm. "We leave first." She slid into the crawl space. Elias followed, revolver held low, his knees scraping dirt. The tightness of the space forced their shoulders close as they moved. He didn't say a word. His breath came shallow in the dark. Above them, wood splintered fully, and the back room door crashed open. Shouts rose, gunmetal clicked. Elias kept his body still, listening for the pattern of footsteps. Maira's hand found his sleeve again. Her fingers tightened, not in fear, but in warning. "They're coming for the farm," she whispered. "Not for us." Elias understood then. They weren't simply after her deed. They were after the outpost's supply lines. They'd let Maira be bait and chase the deed like a trophy. But if Maira and Elias could reach the storage shed and move the papers, the story could flip. They crawled out behind the kitchen shed where the earth was damp and shadowed. Maira moved with quick efficiency, opening a hidden compartment under a broken barrel. Elias followed, his heart pounding against his ribs. Inside was more than food. There were sacks of dried beans, a stack of letters tied with twine, and a small tin box. Maira lifted the tin. "It's the copies," she said. "The duplicates that tell the whole truth." Elias felt hope rise, and then fear chased it. Hope made men reckless. "We can't carry all of this," he said. Maira looked at him. "Then we carry the part that matters, the letter." She shoved the sealed letter into Elias's coat pocket right over his badge strap. Elias's hand covered it like a vow. Footsteps sounded near the shed, too close. Someone had split off from the yard. Elias reached for his revolver again. Maira's eyes flicked to his hand and she shook her head once. "Not yet," she murmured. A silhouette passed the shed corner. The man's hat brim caught light. Elias recognized the gate. Delphine's runner, the one who'd been sent with messages before. The man paused, looking around as if searching for evidence of what happened inside. Then he spoke, low enough to be meant for someone else. "Carter says if Elias won't turn over the deed, he'll be made an example." The runner turned his head toward the outpost buildings. Then his gaze landed on Maira's bundle sitting on a crate. He walked toward it. Maira's fingers moved to a small cloth bundle at her belt. In it was a pinch of something powdery, sifted charcoal or ash. Elias didn't ask. The frontier taught you not to interrupt survival. Maira tossed the powder in a quick arc toward the man's face. The dust bloomed like fog, and the runner coughed, stumbling backward. Elias stepped out and slammed the butt of his revolver into the man's shoulder, not aiming for killing, aiming for silence. The man made a strangled sound. Elias leaned in. "Where's Delphine?" he demanded. The runner's eyes fluttered with panic. She's in the house," he rasped. "But she ain't. "Answer," Elias said. "She's been talking with Carter," the runner choked. "She says if you bring the badge out, the men won't shoot you. She says you'll make a fine story." Elias's blood boiled. Not because it was new, because it meant Delphine had chosen the lie over Maira's safety. Maira's hand tightened on Elias's sleeve. "We can't save Delphine," she said quietly. "We can only save what we still can." Elias nodded once, then shoved the runner behind the shed and bound him with rope from Maira's bundle. The man groaned, but he didn't speak again. They moved quickly toward the house, not through the front yard, but along the back wall where the outpost's shadow thickened. Inside the house, the air smelled of tallow and sweat. A fire still burned low. Elias could hear Delphine's breath, uneven and controlled. He found her near the kitchen table, hands raised as if she'd been caught stealing. She wasn't bound, she wasn't hiding, she was waiting, like a woman who'd rehearsed betrayal. "Elias," Delphine said, and her voice sounded almost soft. "You shouldn't have come back." "You sent men to break my door," Elias replied. "Where is Carter?" Delphine's eyes flicked to Maira. "Carter's outside trying to make you choose. He told me you'd come. He told me you'd be loyal to your badge." Elias's voice hardened. "And you believed him." Delphine's jaw tightened. "I didn't believe him. I needed a shield. You were a shield too big to move without breaking my own bones." Maira stepped forward. "What did you promise him?" Delphine's gaze didn't flinch. "I promised him a path, that's all. A woman with papers and no guns makes good trouble. Men want her land. Men want the story. Carter knows how to turn desire into violence." Elias's hands clenched around his revolver until his knuckles whitened. "You could have told him no," Elias said. Delphine's face cracked for a moment, and Elias saw something underneath the hard talk. Exhaustion, the kind that comes when survival costs too much. "I did," Delphine whispered. "I told him no the first time. He threatened my family's name. He threatened my accounts. He threatened my men. Out here, refusal don't stop bullets." Maira's eyes softened, just barely. It made Elias surprised. He'd expected Maira to hate her. Instead, Maira looked like she understood the shape of fear. "But you still helped," Maira said. Delphine nodded once. "Yes, because I wanted to keep my life. I wanted to keep the outpost's peace the way people keep a candle, by protecting it from drafts. Then you arrived, Elias. You made the drafts less predictable. Carter came to predict them again." Outside, a gunshot cracked through the window. Elias flinched. Maira looked toward the noise with a tight jaw. "They're moving toward the supply shed." Delphine's eyes widened just enough to be honest. "They'll burn it." Elias felt the stakes rise like a fever. If the supply shed burned, the outpost would starve. And if it starved, the men under his command would turn on whoever was left. He looked at Maira. "We can't just hide. We have to act." Maira's gaze met his. "Then give them a story they can't twist." Elias frowned. "How?" Maira nodded toward Delphine. "Delphine's the only one who can speak to the men without them calling her a traitor." Delphine swallowed. "They'll kill me if I step outside." Elias's voice turned grim. "Only if you keep lying. Tell the truth." Delphine stared at him as if the concept was too strange. "The truth won't save me." "It might save them," Elias said, gesturing toward the door. "And if it saves you for one more day, then it's worth the risk." Delphine looked at Maira, and in that look Elias saw something like reluctant respect. Maira was not asking Delphine to be kind. She was asking her to be useful. Delphine rose slowly, hands still raised. "All right," she said. "I'll tell them." Elias and Maira moved with her toward the front door. The yard outside was chaos, smoke, shouting, men moving like they had lost a bet. Carter Pruitt stood near the supply shed, holding a lantern aloft as if he were toasting the end of a season. He spoke to two riflemen with a calm certainty. When Delphine stepped into view, Carter's grin turned triumphant. "You found your way back to reason?" he called. Delphine raised her voice. "Carter Pruitt, that letter you're trusting, your stamp's wrong, your claim's a lie. Elias Calder's got the truth in his pocket, and Maira Choctaw's papers are not stolen." The rifleman froze. Elias felt his heart slam once hard. Delphine was making herself a target, but she was also breaking the story Carter planned to sell. Carter's grin vanished. "Delphine, you're brave now?" Delphine's chin lifted. "I'm tired of being useful to liars." Carter's hand tightened around the lantern. "You think the men care about ink?" he snarled. "They care about hunger. They care about who feeds them." He swung the lantern toward the supply shed. Maira moved faster than Elias could understand. "She didn't shoot at Carter. She ran for the water casks by the porch and grabbed one, dragging it to the shed door. Elias followed, throwing himself into the work with a lawman's fury. He cracked the cask open and poured water as the lantern's heat licked at wood. The shed hissed, smoke rose. The flames fought back, as if the frontier itself wanted the fire. Calder fired a pistol shot, aimed at the water casks, aimed at chaos. Elias ducked, grabbed a second cask, and shoved it under the shed's edge. Men shouted, someone else fired. The yard became a roaring argument. Through the confusion, Elias felt Maira's attention on him, steady, focused. She wasn't simply throwing water, she was guiding. She placed her body where he couldn't take cover alone. She made space for his aim and his movement. Elias caught a glimpse of Calder's face between smoke plumes, furious, afraid, calculating. Calder wasn't afraid of dying, he was afraid of losing control over the story. Elias rose with his revolver and took a measured shot. Not at Calder's chest, but at the lantern's chain. The metal snapped. The lantern clattered to the ground, its flames sputtering. Calder cursed. Elias advanced, boots splashing in dust, and tackled Calder before anyone else could decide which side their hearts belonged to. Calder struggled, but Elias held him tight, using his badge hand to club the pistol away. The fight was messy and human. "Ranger!" Calder spat, voice raw with hate. "You can't save everyone!" Elias leaned close, breath hot. "No," he said, "but I can save the law from men who use it like a knife." Calder's eyes flicked past Elias toward Maira. Then the rifleman shifted again. Delphine's truth had made doubt bloom, and doubt on the frontier meant you could pivot before the bullet decided for you. A guard stepped forward, took Calder's arm, and hauled him back. The gunfire slowed. Smoke hung like a curtain. When the yard quieted, Elias stood with his chest heaving and his coat soaked at the cuffs from water. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline leaving his bones. Maira came to him, not touching him at first. She studied his face like he was a horse that could spook without warning. "You did it," she said quietly. Elias glanced at her bundle, still clutched in her hands like a guarantee. "I didn't do it alone." Maira's eyes held his. "You came for the papers. You came for the truth. That's not nothing." Elias swallowed hard and reached into his pocket. His fingers found the sealed letter. He pulled it out and broke the seal with shaking thumbs. He read the first lines aloud, voice low so only Delphine and Maira could hear. The treaty man's words confirmed what Maira had claimed. The deed transfer wasn't a trick, and it came with protection clauses tied to the outpost farm. It also named Delphine's husband as a witness, his signature forced by fear at the time, later exploited by men like Calder. Delphine's face collapsed with shame and relief, as if the truth had finally stopped being a weapon and became a confession. "I wanted to keep things steady," Delphine whispered. "I didn't think steady meant sacrificing the wrong person." Maira's gaze stayed firm but not cruel. "You were scared," she said. Delphine nodded, tears mixing with sweat. "Yes, and I kept picking fear over fairness." Elias turned toward Maira. "This letter gives you a rightful claim," he said, "but the frontier won't stop trying to take what's right. Not with hunger, and not with men with forged stamps." Maira's jaw tightened. "Then we keep it alive." Elias stared at her, and in his chest something shifted. For days and weeks he'd viewed her as a suspect, a nuisance, a threat to the outpost's order. Now he saw her as a person who had walked into danger with only paper in her hands and survived by making choices men could not easily twist. "What are you planning?" he asked. Maira looked toward the shed, now saved from fire. "Plant. Stay. Not as a hostage, as a farmer." Elias's laugh was short and bitter. "Men will test that." Maira's eyes stayed steady. "Let them. They'll find I'm not the kind of woman you can arrest out of existence." He studied her face, the way her hairline caught the sunlight, the way her eyes never dropped when danger was loud. Then, unexpectedly, Elias felt the weight of his badge on his chest, the weight of being responsible for more than what a paper demanded. He took the badge from his saddlebag earlier in the day and had kept it wrapped. Now, as he looked at Maira, he knew he had to decide where the badge belonged, on his body or inside his story. He stepped closer and held out his hand. Maira hesitated, eyes narrowing. "What are you offering?" Elias's voice turned softer, careful. "Not protection as a jail, protection as a promise. If you stay, I'll defend the deed you brought." Maira's throat moved. She didn't smile, not yet. "Defend it," she repeated. Elias nodded. "And I'll call the men out when they try to steal it under law." Maira's gaze slid to his revolver, to his scar, to his posture that had always been set like a fence. She looked at him the way people look at a river crossing, wondering if it was safe enough to trust. "And if you can't?" she asked. Elias swallowed. "Then I'll be honest about it. I won't hide behind orders. I'll meet hunger with whatever truth I still got." Maira exhaled, and the breath seemed to loosen something in her shoulders. She reached into her bundle and pulled out a small scrap of hide. On it was a beaded pattern, simple but made with time. She held it out. "What's that?" Elias asked. "A mark," she said, "from my people. It means I choose to be seen, not just claimed." Elias took it carefully, as if the beads might shatter. "I'm not asking you to bind yourself to me," he said. Maira's eyes narrowed, but her voice softened. "You already did, when you poured water instead of letting the shed burn." Delphine watched them, her face still wet with tears, her hands clenched and unclenched, like she didn't know what to do with forgiveness. Carter Pruitt was dragged away, curses fading into the distance. The outpost's men gathered in small knots, arguing in broken sentences, and the arguing sounded different now, less like threat, more like calculation. Elias knew what would come next: hearings, paperwork, retaliation in whispers. The frontier didn't end with one gunshot. It ended with a long series of choices. That night, the fire in the yard crackled and popped. Smoke curled up under the dark sky. Elias sat on a crate near the kitchen, his coat still damp. Maira sat beside him on a lower stool, her bundle placed between them like a third presence. Delphine hovered near the doorway, quieter than Elias had ever seen her. The outpost sounded tired now, like a horse after a hard ride. Elias looked at Maira and realized his badge no longer felt like a weight. It felt like a tool he could choose to use for good. "What did you mean earlier," he asked, "about making a story they can't twist?" Maira's gaze rested on the fire. "A story is what men use to make violence seem deserved. I made sure the violence had to be paid for in daylight." Elias nodded slowly. "And me?" "You made it about law," she replied, "not about blood." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I thought law would keep people safe." Maira's mouth tightened. "Law kept people safe when the law was made with conscience. In this place, too many men made law to excuse their hungers." Elias felt the sting of it. His badge had been a comfort, a shield he could hide behind. Now he knew it could become a weapon in someone else's hands. He looked at her bundle, then at her hands. "If I had arrested you that first day," he said, "then Carter would have won. The deed would have vanished under new papers. The shed would have burned. Delphine would have been the only voice left to write the truth." Maira's eyes lifted. "And you didn't." "I didn't because I saw the seal," Elias admitted. "But also because you weren't afraid in the way men expected. You held yourself like you'd already decided what you'd endure." Maira's gaze held his. "Does that mean you want me?" The question hit him like a sudden calm after gunfire. Elias had flirted before, once in a town far enough away that his regrets couldn't follow. But he had never spoken to a woman like she was a choice worth risking his pride for. He stared at her and let honesty arrive without armor. "I want you," he said, voice low. Not as a prisoner, not as a case, as a person whose courage changed the direction of my law. Maira's breath caught. She looked away for a heartbeat, and Elias noticed how her hands clenched around the beaded mark he held. When she looked back, her eyes were shiny with something she refused to hide. "I'm not easy," she said. "I know," Elias replied. Maira let out a quiet laugh, and it sounded like smoke turning into heat. "Then don't try to make me small." Elias reached out and touched her knuckles with his fingertips, light, asking permission, not taking it. She didn't pull away. She leaned in by degrees, just enough to make his heartbeat speed up. Outside the firelight, the frontier waited. Tomorrow would bring new threats, new paperwork, new men trying to buy violence. Elias would have to face his captain's anger. He would have to justify why Carter was restrained and why Maira wasn't hauled away like a criminal. But tonight, the outpost's air held something it hadn't held in months, a shared certainty that they had survived the standoff and could choose each other without pretending it was simple. Maira rested her shoulder against his arm. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in wood smoke and river-sweet air. He thought of the badge in his saddlebag at the start of the day, the tool he'd carried like a habit. Now it was clear the law wasn't the badge. The law was what he did when his authority could have been an excuse. He opened his eyes and looked at Maira. "If they come for you again," he said, "I'll meet them with the deed in one hand and the truth in the other." Maira's smile was small but real. "And I'll meet them with planting seasons and patience." Delphine stood in the doorway, watching them with a face that had changed. She didn't look pleased. She looked relieved to see something go right for once. When Elias finally spoke again, his voice held a steadier promise than any contract. "We'll build it here," he said. Maira's eyes softened. "Then don't leave me to the frontier's mercy." Elias turned his hand over and offered it fully. This time there was no doubt, no careful hesitation. Maira took his hand, fingers interlaced. Their palms fit like they'd been made for the same journey. Outside, the Rio Grande kept moving, indifferent and alive. Inside the outpost, the story finally belonged to the people who'd earned it. Two flawed souls refusing to let the law be a muzzle and letting love be more than a rumor whispered by men who'd never stood in the smoke. And when sleep came, it came not as surrender, but as peace they had dug for themselves with frightened hands and stubborn hearts.